Welcome to Hoovie's Garage, the dumbest automotive channel in all of YouTube, and this is a 2003 Audi Allroad, and it's considered by many to be one of the worst cars ever made, or one of the more unreliable cars ever put upon this earth. Now, my daddy, Doug DeMiro, he didn't have very kind things to say about this Audi Allroad many years ago, and he actually ran over a nearly identical one with his Land Rover Defender. But really, is it all that bad? Is it really one of the most unreliable, worst cars ever made? And honestly, I don't think so. Now, my friend Bob at Euroasian Auto Inc., he's a dealer. He bought this car as a trade-in somewhere for next to nothing, and he asked me to look at the car and decide if it's worth saving. Should it be reconditioned and have its numerous issues fixed to be retailed to someone and make their lives miserable, or should it go to the back to his junkyard to be broken up for spares? And really, I didn't even need to look at this car to give him the answer, but I decided to humor him, and actually, I'm somewhat conflicted now. Still, on paper, the Allroad really doesn't seem that bad. It's a station wagon that was Audi's answer to the SUV craze in the United States. They weren't building an SUV yet, so they took their station wagon and gave it some rugged off-road capability. They also made it a little tougher looking, as you can see, with the matte paint job on the bumper and the fender flares, and even the roof is painted matte gray to match. It has some interesting, cool stuff that makes it different from any other station wagon or SUV at the time. And their engine's actually a high-performance twin-turbo V6 that was shared with their S-Line, their S4. So this could have been a really cool vehicle, but unfortunately, it's just absolutely awful from a reliability standpoint. So let's look at this from Audi's standpoint. You're trying to get into the SUV segment or the ever-dwindling station wagon segment, so you need to be different somehow. And the best station wagons at the time were built by Mercedes from a comfort standpoint, or maybe BMW if you wanted kind of a sporty luxury wagon. And then there was Volvo building their XC70, a station wagon lifted similar with this, with cladding and all that for some off-road capability. So you had to take a mixture of those and put them all in one car to try and appeal to everybody, and that was the Allroad. So that's why the body has all this two-tone going on with the bumpers and the fender flares, and I'm not sure if this was supposed to be chrome originally or if this is peeling plastic dip, but anyway, it's a much sleeker looking car compared to the XC70. The flat roof is an odd touch. It looks like it's broken from the factory, but I'm pretty sure that's original. Now, the car itself, despite being in shabby condition, really isn't that bad looking. It's actually a handsome car, and the interior is actually well put together as well. I'm actually surprised how well this interior has held up, considering this is a pretty abused car. But you're probably noticing, yes, the interior is green. The dashboard is green. Everything is green. There's multiple shades of green in here, 3 or 4, and I absolutely love it. I love that they're trying to be different and trying to be quirky and fun. But the interior, otherwise, it is very nice, and the seats are really comfortable, and look how well the interior is holding together after 142,000 miles. The wood's not even cracked anywhere. So with the interior and overall, the fit and finish is pretty good. It's holding up pretty well exterior-wise. The paint that's not damaged is still in good shape. The faded headlights, that's pretty common with all cars with plastic headlights. I'm overall pretty impressed with how well this car has held up looks-wise. Unfortunately, it's the mechanicals that are really starting to let this car down. So I guess the unintentional mission of this channel is to prove that German or European reliability really isn't the case, even with the older cars. My recently sold 500e had a lot of stuff wrong with it for a little over 100,000 miles, and that's considered to be one of the most durable, rugged cars of all time. The 740i that I recently fixed needed the transmission taken out of it and the engine all torn apart at 80,000 miles. 80,000 miles on this car. Now, all these manufacturers, they'll make mistakes. There's little snafus, there's little oopsies that a German car maker will make. BMW does it more than most, Mercedes does it too. But Audi is different. Audi seems to do things that are intentionally made to break or make it impossible for the owners to fix the cars themselves. At least at the time, they were famous for this. And that's why Audi gets a lot more hate, I think, than other brands. And this engine is a perfect example of this. Behold the 2.7-liter bi-turbo V6, and despite being a V6, as you can see, it is crammed in here. There is no room to access anything on the front of the engine. Any of the accessories. Yes, the entire front end has to come off, and I just noticed that the tow hook cover is exposed, typical Audi Allroad. It all has to come off, the radiators, everything, to service many things on the front, including the timing belt, which is supposed to be changed every 100,000 miles or so. This is absolutely ridiculous. It makes it DIY very unfriendly or super expensive to do at a shop, and it seems like Audi, well, it likes doing this on purpose. It likes to make customers miserable, or they just don't care about what happens when their cars get old, which was kind of special to Audi, but becoming more commonplace today. We'll get on that in a little bit, but continuing with the issues. This twin-turbo V6, in addition to being nearly impossible to service, the turbos will fail left and right very consistently, and they will leak oil when they're not failing. And despite the setup only putting out about 250 horsepower, for some reason the transmissions just aren't able to handle it. Audi put in this shiftable automatic transmission, and it is not very durable at all. Failures before 100,000 miles are incredibly common. So you have really not very good engines that are not serviceable, you have bad transmissions, and then you have the air ride suspension. This thing sat on air ride. It would lift up in the air several inches if you needed any more extra off-road clearance, and it was just awful. It was failing all the time. But this one has had its suspension bypassed already, so it's sitting on normal struts with springs, and other than the light being on all the time, it seems fine. So this Audi came with 0 service records, nothing typical for a used car that's pretty much worthless. I know the suspension's been changed over, but I have no idea if the timing belt's been changed, and well, it has some other pretty obvious issues. The transmission, it's shifting okay, the engine is running okay, but when you look underneath, I don't need to go to the wizard or the Audi dealer to show you what is wrong with this thing. Starting with the leaks, you can kind of see some coming on the drip pan there, obvious oil leaks, but then look what's dangling back there. Let me get a better angle on this. Yes, there are just wires dragging on the ground of this Allroad, and what this should be connecting to are oxygen sensors on the exhaust, and that exhaust, well, it's non-existent. Well, it is existing, but it's existing in the wrong place. For some reason, this Audi Allroad's catalytic converters have decided to, well, fall off or rust off, which is definitely not encouraging. Probably replacing these catalytic converters would exceed the value of the car. Maybe you can weld them back on somehow, but I doubt that's going to work. It's also not very encouraging when you buy a car and there's coolant in the back for top off, same with oil. But on the plus side, the doggy divider seems to still be working. So you can imagine this thing without any exhaust on it, and being a twin turbo V6, it has an interesting sound. That's actually not bad. That's somewhat redeeming. Before we set off though, I wanted to run all the codes on this thing, and it's coming back with 10 codes. Really not as bad as I thought it would be. Most of them having to do with the oxygen sensors that are no longer attached to the car. There's one for secondary air injection and one for coolant system performance, but otherwise it has all to do with the oxygen sensors that have fallen off and made the exhaust, well, made the exhaust sound awesome. And we're off. As you can see, check engine light on, suspension warning on. The suspension level light is flashing at you constantly. Obviously this is because the air suspension is no longer existent. It's been bypassed, regular struts on here, but you'd think they would have put in some kind of, well, resistors or something to trick the lights into turning off and not flashing at you all the time, but oh well, not my car. Pulling out into traffic. Yeah. Well, the no exhaust thing is perhaps an improvement. And actually, I'm surprised at how nicely this thing drives. The bypass suspension is actually pretty smooth and comfortable. The seats, like I said earlier, are very comfortable. And when I just coast, it's actually quiet. And I just realized this, my God, the complicated German cup holder, it still works. It's a miracle. I also have cold air conditioning. All 4 windows, yes, are working. Maybe this isn't a car that should be killed, because if you fix the exhaust, that gets rid of a lot of the check engine light issues. This could be a serviceable car for somebody if they could just ignore the fact that it's leaky all under there. What? Interesting choice to downshift there. But we're at 60. And we're cruising. And now we're at 65. The drone's kind of gone away and this car is somewhat livable. This is a livable, usable car. I never would have expected this car to be this good. Now, don't get me wrong, this thing is terrible. It's awful, it's unreliable, it has a bunch of issues, and you should never, ever own one of these. But is it the worst car ever? Is it the most unreliable car ever made? Well, maybe at one point, but given the way new cars are now, I don't think that's the case anymore. So when I first picked up this car, or even before I saw it, I figured, yeah, it's gonna go right in here into the junkyard. But now that I've had a little bit of time to enjoy it, to get to know it, maybe it's worth saving. Just maybe. If you're an Audi enthusiast and you really like one of these, well, you can call Bob at Euro Agent Auto Inc. and he'll sell it to you. But it won't be super cheap because these things are pretty valuable parts-wise. The engine shared with the S4 and all that stuff's probably worth a few grand on its own. But maybe it's worth saving. Now, service-wise, I was looking up some other parts and they're really not that bad. The turbos, they sell for about $300 each, so that's not awful. The transmissions, I can find a used one for $700 or $800, which really isn't that bad. And the suspension you can convert like this one, and it will be completely usable for, well, under $2,000. Really not awful. This definitely isn't the worst car ever made, the most unreliable car ever made. As for what is, it's probably a car that's being built right now. This Audi, in my opinion, is kind of a trendsetter. Nowadays, most modern cars have turbocharged engines, air ride suspension, fancy shifting transmissions, and just like this Audi Allroad, how do you think all of these cars with all these complicated mechanical bits are going to hold up? Are they going to hold up better than this Audi Allroad? I don't think so. I think they're going to be worse. I think they're going to be breaking at alarming rates in the coming years, and we don't know which car is the worst, most unreliable car being made right now because it's too new. Just wait a few years. And while Mercedes and BMW are all doing this crazy stuff, it's not just the Germans and the Europeans. American cars are doing this too. EcoBoost, you have it everywhere. We just don't know yet how awful they are going to be, but I imagine that plenty of them are going to be terrible, terrible. Thank you for watching.